Hello and welcome to the show. This is all about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. DEI has become, in my view, and many people's view, sort of a description of something that is wrong, something that's unfair, something that people don't like. And then I saw this magazine, Report on Business, and there's a woman there who is quoted. I had to take out my glasses to read this. They're talking about the beneficiaries of DEI find that there's an invisible asterisk beside their names, while peers resent them for allegedly unearned privilege. In other words, some people get the jobs because of DEI, and they shouldn't. And so they have this asterisk beside them. I said, well, that's a really smart thing. It was written by Michelle Grocholsky. So I looked her up. And here she is. And thank you very much for coming on to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
We want to talk about this because you seem, unlike a few years ago when every law firm in Canada was going, we have DEI lawyers, and we're going to make sure you, business and people, pay us to make sure you are compliant with DEI, and they're shoving things down people's throats. And a lot of unfairness came about. I think everybody knows somebody or has heard of somebody who was bypassed for a promotion. I know many people, white males predominantly, who have been bypassed in promotions in favor of a young, not as trained, not as well-deserving person who either was female or of color or had something else where the employer wanted to say, oh, we're compliant with DEI. So, since you were so good in this article, you said that DEI is being applied incorrectly. Is that fair?
It's fair. This priority around equity, diversity, and inclusion really had an uptick back in 2020 in the wake of George Floyd's murder. And what we saw at that time were organizations who were just clamoring to show that they are not a part of the problem, that they are not racist, that they are not homophobic, for example, or xenophobic. And so they got to work establishing EDI teams, portfolios, creating their strategies. But not all of those strategies were created equal. Many of these organizations did good work. They looked at how they were making decisions to root out any discrimination, any bias, to make sure that they were being fair and evidence-based in how they were making decisions.
Which is proper.
Exactly.
Everybody watching now is saying, we want everybody to be treated fairly and companies to treat people fairly.
Exactly.
But that's not happening now.
Many organizations didn't do that. And so what they focused on was the diversity aspect without looking at inclusion and equity. So that meant many organizations had quotas to say, look, we need by the end of this year to have this many people who represent these different communities, whether it's people with disabilities or Indigenous people, for example. And if we don't hit these targets, well, it's going to impact people's bonuses, as an example. And so what happened is that rather than getting to the root of why different communities were not in those organizations to begin with, they were hiring folks to essentially check a box and to say, look how diverse we actually are.
So how irresponsible was that on behalf of employers or large corporations or people, executives making $500,000 and they're really doing stupid things?
It's deeply irresponsible because not only were they not setting those people up for success once they got hired,
right.
They weren't, for example, being given access to information or the networks or the resources. In some instances, they were not the right person for the job. But what ended up happening was they then set up this expectation that every time we hire someone who's a woman, for example, they don't make it here. They just don't have what it takes. And so it becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Oh, really? So, I mean, that a few years ago, that practice then has resulted in failure, not failure to meet the quotas, but failure to have good employees doing the job.
We've seen a significant turnover of people who have been hired in a quota-based system where there hasn't been the prevalence of inclusion and equity. Inclusion being you are treated in a way that upholds your dignity and respect. We listen to you, your ideas matter, you are treated in a way that makes you feel valued. Equity is about you are being treated fairly, you're being paid fairly, you have access to what you need to succeed. If people aren't given the culture and the tools or the fair treatment in order to succeed, of course they're going to leave. But it's not necessarily because they weren't talented to begin with. It is often because they were not invested in order to thrive.
I hear that point, and we're going to take a break here. When we come back, because we have the whole show on this, we're going to end up asking you how to fix all of this. But right now, when I come back, I'm going to ask you whether the government is worse at this than the private sector. Right back after this. Whoa.